Good morning, everybody in the United States. Good afternoon, people in the UK, Europe, Asia. Good evening, actually, people in India and other parts of the world. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Fersht, CEO at HFS Research, and I'm delighted to work on a terrific research project with KPMG that we do every year called the State of Operations and Outsourcing. We cover a large tranche of the Global 2000. And I'm going to be unveiling some of the key findings from that study today, joined with some very special guests who I'll introduce very shortly. Before we get started, we also welcome some interaction from the audience. So if you bring up your little control panel on the Zoom thingy up in the right hand of your screen, you can click on Q&A, you can type in your question, and we'll try and get to as much of these as possible. If not, we'll try and get to them as well after the session offline. And you'll also be able to get a copy of the recording of this, as well as the copy of the slides as well if you go to hfsresearch.com, and that should be available shortly after the webcast. So esteemed guests joining me today, I'll get them to introduce themselves briefly, starting from the right with Anshul Varma.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Anshul Varma, Managing Director at KPMG. I lead our global business services advisory area in the US, mostly focused on helping companies figure out how to use business services models to continue to optimize and improve the way they function. Excellent.
Thanks, Arnold. Great to have you on here. First time I think we've actually had you live on this, but I've known you for several years, so if you to share some of your hands-on experiences, especially over recent years with everybody, and also an old campaigner, but new to this great role, Charles Arnold. Charles, introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Phil. Charles Arnold. I lead our Procurement and Business Services network here at KPMG, which houses the Global Business Services Advisory component, which Anshul leads for us. It also houses our outsourcing advisory and our core procurement advisory capabilities, and so we have sort of a wide perspective on all of these elements: the operating model elements, the third-party involvement elements, and the management of those third parties in terms of cost, risk, and performance. So we've brought all of those together into one focus, and we think gives us a pretty wide perspective on the materials we're going to be chatting about today.
Thank you, Charles. Looking forward to hearing from you. And yeah, we were going to feature our Chief Data Officer, Jamie Snowden. Unfortunately, Jamie's actually been taken a bit ill. So we've got his boss on today, Saurabh Gupta. Many of you will know he's our Chief Research Officer. Welcome, Saurabh.
Hey, thanks, Phil. I'm glad to be here speaking with you, Charles and Anshul, about this really interesting study where we interviewed 350 plus Global 2000 enterprises on what their views are in terms of the operating models of the future, and looking forward to share some insights.
Excellent. Good. So without further ado, we'll kick off with some of the conversation here. And we're going to really look at this shift in outsourcing intentions. We're calling it straight to digital, which I think has many meanings beyond what it sounds like. We'll talk a bit about that. We've covered a lot over the last 7 or 8 years, the evolution of global business services, and we'll really bring out some data on how much that aligns with the C-suite, how our enterprise investment priorities shifting. So it's not just where companies are spending money, but where they're intending to spend money and where their focuses are shifting as well. Because just because they may be focused on some of these emerging areas doesn't necessarily mean they're actually investing in them. And then finally, we're going to have some serious discussion with, we'll obviously engage some of you folks from the audience about the future for business services. And is this I think we've joked, is this buying a Tesla, or is there an interim step along the way? How do we get to where we're going? The industry is clearly in a transitional state. What is this journey? What does it look like? And how do we engage this, and how do we thrive in this? So Saurabh, if you want to start off by talking a bit about the operating model shift and how that's supporting business outcomes.
I think what we are seeing now is the nature of the global business services is changing quite dramatically. The expectations from the global business services are changing as well. And if you look at the operating models from the last 20, 30 years, we started with a journey from shared services and outsourcing, which was all about centralization. I think we moved into this concept of end-to-end processes and global business services, where we started to see more and more silos come together. So we moved from things like payables to procure to pay. And as a result, we saw finance and procurement working closely together. We moved from receivables to order to cash, and we saw sales, supply chains, finance, and other organizations starting to work together. And I think the culmination of that was what we started to call the one office, wherein if you take that end-to-end processes and look at the front, middle, and back all together, there is really one office that matters, and that's the office that caters to the customer. And that's the model that we are starting to see emerge, especially with a lot of these emerging technologies now enabling that. Having said that, I think the global business services is still, as you can see on this slide today, is still, while only 11% of the enterprises have a true global business services, about a third of them will get into that model over the next 3 years. But the nature of this global business services is going to look and feel very different because it's no longer just going to be about the back office, but it's going to be more about the one office, where the front, middle, and back is going to be the global business services are expected to look at the overall enterprise transformation than just the back office. And at that point, I actually wanted to bring you in, Charles, and sort of given your experience of working with so many of these clients, do you think you're experiencing this in real life as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So I think if you think about the just a few bits of data that you've shared with us just as we've introduced this, and some that we'll talk about later in our conversation today, I think that the shift that's really unfolding is about expectations. The original expectation of the shared service outsourcing construct was just take costs out of the system by any means necessary. The next expectation was start to deliver value or make those things more effective. And that's where the end-to-end really came into play. And some of the data that we'll show later in today's discussion indicates that there's some general acceptance of that progress, and that people are feeling like we've gotten organizations further down the path with those end-to-end focuses, whether they are in a true global business service construct, multi-function type of an organization, or a functional shared service, or even simply centralized. All of them are delivering on that promise. The problem, though, that organizations are trying to address is this move to digital. Getting more out in front of customer interactions and customer sentiments, customer interface, and these organizations are getting pulled into, and in fact, actually in several instances, asked to lead those efforts to move forward. So, if I would just sort of say anything about this evolution that we see on this chart and that we've seen throughout the data that we'll be discussing today, is that it's less about what the functional shared services or the global business services organizations are delivering, and more about why. Why are they focused on these efforts, and how do they align to the strategic objectives of the companies they support? Less about task management at low cost, and more about leading the charge, and driving innovation and digital linkages, making them more effective.
No, that's great, Charles, and I think
Absolutely.
the why is where we are seeing this conversation move straight to digital.
I brought out
and
the
Phil,
last
do you want
5
to
years
talk a
of
little
state
bit
of
about
outsourcing studies
that shift
across Global 2000? Each year we go with a different sample set, but we get a very consistent view of insights from global leaders of operations. And back in 2014, when people were looking at the extensiveness of offshoring across business operations, you can see here, these are those who are looking aggressively at increasing their offshoring footprint. That has steadily decreased over the years to the point where in the areas of highlighted finance and IT, even in IT apps now, only 3% are looking at sort of aggressive increases in 2019 versus much higher numbers before that. I don't think it's just because people are doing less of it, they're actually continuing to do more. I just think it's become part of the fabric of their operations now. People don't think about offshore as part of a strategy. It's become part of the portfolio. You know, I think when we look back to the recession and 10 years ago, even more, 11 years ago, 2008, that was the real boom time for ITO. I mean, I think people embrace globalization more, really built that into their delivery model. Now that's become mainstream in delivery. The focus is shifting now to the next phase. And, you know, we talk a lot about hyper-connectedness, but, you know, our belief is that everything we've done in the last 3 or 4 decades has been pretty much, you know, using things like outsourcing and shared services. How do we do things more efficiently, a little bit cheaper, embrace globalization, embrace standardization of process? But what we've not done is fundamentally change the process, to change how we do things. And at this point in the industry, I think a lot of enterprises have run out of wiggle room. You know, there isn't that obvious, where's our next 10% coming from? But people are also realizing they can see the value in automation, AI, and digital. And there's a beautiful end state out there if you can get there, but how do you get there is the big challenge. And so if we click on here, here's another piece of data. This is actually from last year's study, but I think it was relevant as people were looking at their 2019 investments in cost reduction. You can see here 50% plus across industries, across most industries, are looking aggressively at RPA. Only 10% were looking at outsourcing. And you're taking industries like insurance and banking here, which are fairly experienced at offshoring. You know, they're looking much more aggressively at how do we leverage automation to find those next thresholds of value. As we look on here, when we looked at investment across global organizations, 30% of them are already spending more than 50 million a year in intelligent automation tech. So this stuff has really arrived. It's really here. The spending is being made. Now we're at a point on how do companies manage those investments more smartly. You know, how do they figure out who to partner with to plug expertise gaps, etc. There we go. So here I think is the sort of pivotal data from the study, which is a little surprising to some, but every year we've looked at increasing intentions in actual outsourcing, and you know, what's happened here is what's happened here is between 2018 and 2019, you can see 19 on the right here, there's been a significant drop in the interest in outsourcing as a delivery model. This is the first significant drop we've seen ever. I think in the last decade in the industry. Last year it was running at around 64%. This year it's down to 28%, and only a quarter of companies are staying the same. Yeah, so I think this isn't that outsourcing, like we looked at offshoring, is no longer being seen as the delivery model of choice that companies want to look through. You know, even areas around shared services are fairly flat to lessening. I think there's a shift going on in how companies are thinking about service delivery, thinking about the model they need, thinking about how they're going to be successful. Okay. Right. So this is, I think, the nub of the data that we want to talk about today. So if we start at the left here, 23% upon expiry of their outsourcing contracts are going to renew with their same provider. Not a lot of change. They're pretty happy with what they've got. But 75% plus are looking to make significant changes as their relationships expire. I think the next tranche here, 27%, you know, they're looking at maybe staying with their current provider, but they want to see, you know, more outcome focus, more increased automation. They want to see more from their provider than what they're currently getting. You know, when you talk to clients today, many are saying, hey, we've had 750 people in Manila running on these processes for the last decade. Why isn't that decreasing, right? we had 200 people in HR, now we have 20, right? Why are we still running things the same way with the same levels of people driving these processes? They need to see a faster move to digital. We're seeing this in captives and shared services as well, which is how do we make the shift from relying on fairly seismic pools of labor to ones where we can leverage more digital tech, and make a shift from maybe relying on labor to more of a talent strategy. And I think there's a difference between labor just to keep processing and talent to actually add more value beyond that in alignment with the business. So the next slide, the next piece of data here in red shows that 32% of enterprises actually are looking to change provider upon renewal. I think this is an alarming statistic. This tells you that they've sort of given up on the current provider to change how they do things, get anything different. They've decided it's time to switch. It's time to look at somebody else, try and find a partner that's willing to invest strategically in us. And as you look at the portfolio of services clients in the industry, I think every service provider is on a defense and attack strategy, which is people talk about cannibalizing their business. It's difficult when you have serious clients paying serious money. So what you have to do is figure out how to retain the clients you feel you can grow with strategically. You may have to lose some clients because they're just going to become unprofitable. And how can you attack clients from your competitors with disruptive offerings? And I think this is the first time we're seeing the outsourcing space under true disruption in the industry. And it's going to be fascinating to see who can jostle for position and win this one, because 17% have actually said, we're just going to bring this stuff back and automate it. And I think we'll see more of that. Clients realizing maybe we just bring this back in-house. Let's build our own Tesla so we can drive it faster. And then maybe we look for more, help down the road. So you've got your gas guzzlers in the green. They don't want to change. You've got your people who may invest in a hybrid car and in the next tranche. And then you've got the other folks who are looking more for how do we just get there faster, more aggressively. I hear from executives in the service providers who claim that clients aren't moving fast enough. They're not going to make the switch. But we have to be conscious that decisions are being made now beyond your finance controllers and your procurement heads and some of your CIOs. We've got bigger decisions being made at the C-suite for, why are we spending, $1 billion a year on a lot of these transactional services when we can make a more strategic shift to looking at partners who might do something different. And I think the golden rule here is the partners that got many of us here might not be the right ones to actually take us where we're going. Click on here. There we go. And so, this data here, I think, really reveals, something fairly significant in the industry in terms of, where people are externalizing investments. So you can see here the top three are mainly around, I think, let me just do one thing here. All right, there we go, let's move it on. There we go. So the top three areas here are looking at more complex technical needs. So enterprises are looking much more aggressively at externalizing needs around cognitive and AI, RPA, enabling much more personalization with products to the customer needs. They're looking at areas that they don't have the skill sets internally to take advantage of, where they're we just do something here. Share my own screen, it'll be a bit easier. All right, fantastic. There we go. See here how these slides are supposed to look. And as we look at where enterprises are looking to bring more in-house focus, it's around data governance. It's about aligning front to back. It's about having much more of a virtual operating model. And it's about creating data that's much more predictive and less reactive with enterprises. So as you look at the roles today of the CFO, CMO, CPO, etc., they're increasingly becoming data managers. They need help with governing, managing, archiving, but predicting business needs around the data that they've got. And they need help with the technology that's required to get there. So I think this is the future of the services and operations industry, which is the data governance needs are becoming paramount, and partners to help with the complexity of technology is becoming key to that. So we got some data here from 100 C-suite executives, and we broke down those C-suite by business and IT. And what's fascinating here is that the business C-suite believe what's holding them back from an ideal one office framework is legacy thinking from the business, legacy thinking from IT, less about talent. So the business is basically saying, look, we think we've got good people. We think we've got the ability to make the shift. We need to change our mindset. We need to change our culture. We need to do things differently. What's interesting is when we get to the IT side of the fence, they also agree there's a mindset cultural shift and a change problem going on. But 45% of them really corroborate the data point we just showed on the previous slide, which is 45% see a lack of talent as their biggest impediment to moving forward with their company and their frameworks. So I think here we're seeing an issue around the fact that the business model needs to shift. The business leaders recognize that. To make that shift, you need to start to embrace new ways of looking at operations, and you need the ability of IT to partner with you to have the technical capabilities to get there. And that's where I think we're seeing a lot of pressure points in the industry. Because what's absolutely critical here, and I think this is one of the key takeaways from the study, is that when we look at the burning business pressures that are holding companies back, you can see the number one rank here is this shift towards digital online experiences, this shift away from face-to-face engagements, this need to hyper-personalize products to customers. What we're seeing in this industry is a desire to make the shift from physical to digital, this shift from labor to talent, this change in mindset on people want to do a lot more in a digital type environment. It's about not just how do you interact with customers digitally, but how do you have your employees manage digital associates and smart technologies to enable that? How do you develop a supply chain with your partners and your suppliers, for example, to also engage in a digital fashion with you as well? So I think this is much more than just about the customer. This is about the entire ecosphere around the organization, which becomes digitized. That sort of takes us into our one office, which many of you will be familiar with by now, I hope, where we look at the traditional way of driving that customer-centric organization. How do you personalize? How do you mobilize? How do you make this touchless? This is only possible when it's really driven by this digital underbelly where you can rewire to unified data, cloudify, secure it, automate it, where you take your support functions and really align your marketing, customer support, finance, procurement, call it middle back office, what you may. This needs to become one office. You need to find a way to really unify your team around common outcomes, common mindsets, common thinking, common training. Make sure your middle managers in particular go on machine learning courses to understand the ability to leverage that to be more effective. How do you become more inclusive with your mindsets? How do you shift your whole approach to breaking down these barriers? Making that front and back much more unified. We have this joke right now that we call it the missing middle. How do you fill that void in the company to make it more effective? How do you look at process design to make it more customer centric, make it more customer to cash, less invoice to cash, and that sort of thing? And then ultimately, how do you become more predictive? Digital in the old form was all about responding to customer needs as those needs happened. But digital, as it's evolving, is about predicting customer needs even before those customers may even realize what they're going to do. So how do you get smarter at maybe integrating supply chains more effectively, leveraging technologies like machine learning to really free up your talent to be more predictive as well? Start to look at the emergence of innovations like blockchain, which can start to bring together intelligence that you may never have had before as an organization. So it can be far more responsive, simplified, and unified as you move. I'll leave you with a piece of data which I think is pretty relevant here, which is where we look at the fact that we talk a lot about the customer, but when it comes to real investment in integrated automation, everyone's spending the big money on the back office. So F&A, GBS, compliance, and areas like that. Customer service, sales and marketing is right down the bottom. It's even below HR in terms of people making investments. So when I talk to CMOs and digital leaders around where they're evolving, they're not connected. There's a different mindset evolving in that front office than the middle and back. And I think that's a big issue that we're starting to uncover with organizations as you start to look to how things are moving. We really start to have to look at bringing together an agenda that's driven more by the business and less by the CIO. It's about, being much more focused on prioritizing business cases. It's being much more focused around feasibility and specification development being led by the business. We're looking at areas like the technology cost estimation that has to be developed in partnership. All these things, coordination with partners, who are the right SIs that you need to deal with to be effective. If you can start to crack that business IT quagmire to leverage RPA, AI, digital more effectively, then you're going to be successful. I think that RPA was the first time many business leaders got exposure to sort of low-code, no-code tech. They're in the conversation now, and it's a different conversation that IT is having. And so you're not going to be successful with AI until you have a really good agenda that's driven from the CMO, the CFO, for example, that's really supported effectively in tandem with IT in many of these areas. So I wanted to shift over to Anshul now, who's going to talk a bit about the agenda for business leaders.
Thank you, Phil. So I think this some of the data that you just went over, I think, continues to kind of lead us into what we are calling the business agenda and the capabilities that business services leaders need to have in order to take advantage of kind of what's going on, especially with this move straight to digital. I think what became very clear to us through the study was, one, the top respondents are addressing the digital requirements and threats versus kind of that sole focus that business services used to have on cost and process efficiency. Not to say that is not important, but it's increasingly kind of starting to think about how do we shift away from this focus on cost takeout to having an intent to get GBS more involved in the connected enterprise, kind of the pull through from the back office to the front office. As we talk to our clients, we see that they're developing these capabilities in 6 areas. There's about 18 to 20 capabilities sitting in these 6 areas. And let me focus on 3 really quickly. The first one is what we are calling the front leading capability. Think about kind of the business services organizations that have figured out a way to do this well, and a lot of what you talked about, Phil, in terms of capabilities around how do we prioritize and fund digital initiatives in spite of unclear business cases? How do we allocate resources? What policies do we need to ensure compliance with these digital assets that we are introducing to the business? What rules should we adopt internally to ensure a consistent customer experience? A lot of those kind of start to build on capability, service management frameworks, and how to deliver a superior customer experience. A lot of those capabilities are what we think business services organizations that have done it well are going to have to continue to adapt those to the new digital reality. One of my clients, a consumer company, set up a digital acceleration team within their business services organization that hosts experts from all over the world that they can share knowledge, share best practices. They talk about kind of how to efficiently build applications, and it's almost like a laboratory like environment where they bring in people from different parts of the business, help and use them to help kind of drive then the solutions out to the rest of the enterprise. Second one that I would focus on here is kind of this idea of this capability set around what we are calling customer first. One of the interactions that we are starting to see with some of our business services clients is focused on this idea of a seamless experience across the internal and external customers of the connected enterprise, in driving a better employee, driving a better customer experience. And again, for those of us that have been running business services, have operated in that world, that's always been important. But I think what's fundamentally different right now is this capability set is focused on end-to-end customer experiences, end-to-end customer journeys. I've got a client, a consumer client that is currently looking at kind of how they incorporate Uber delivery and then orchestrate everything that goes into making that happen. And what's interesting with this is you've got kind of Uber with all their digital processes and this client with their legacy paper processes. And how do you kind of integrate that experience all the way from the cashier and the front end through to reconciliation and the back end? But they start to do that when they think about these end-to-end journeys and then orchestrating the various pieces from IT to finance to customer operations to the customer service representative and so on. Orchestrating that journey is what GBS organizations are getting good at. And then within that journey, introducing various technology elements and not just kind of deploying technology for the sake of deploying technology. The third area that I would highlight is the data capability, is kind of what we're calling the information insights engine. This, as you said, this is exactly my experience in the marketplace right now. Is a lot of my business services clients are starting to talk about moving away from transaction services to data services. One of the large GBS clients we have told us that about 75% of enterprise data is flowing through their business service organization. And they've got to continue to get really good at integrating that data, curating that data, qualifying that data, and making it usable and efficiently usable for business and IT to kind of apply AI and apply analytics. And GBS has a significant role in kind of making sure that data is available for the business to use. So we're starting to see them really turn on their data capability from that perspective, and enabling some of that transformation to happen in the business. Back to you, Phil.
Awesome. So as we look at where we're shifting here, do you think that we're getting enough alignment? Maybe Charles wants to hop in with this, but do you think we're getting enough alignment with the C-suite as we look at how we've advanced in recent years?
I'm going to say that is decidedly a work in progress, and some of the data that you've got up here on the screen absolutely supports that. So we've been talking about, over the course of these last several minutes, an evolution. The evolution that shows that the where things were, kind of why we were doing them in the past, is moving to a different set of objectives. And by the way, there are some questions I'll quickly address that have come through on the chat. For example, one participant asked the question, is it possible that the decrease in outsourcing is just because they've already outsourced it? And then there was another slide that we had that was similar that talked about a significant decrease of offshoring because we've already offshored it. I think that's absolutely the case. I think that's exactly what we're seeing. And yet, here we see on this slide that the C-suite continues to focus on driving down operating costs and continues to be least satisfied with the fact that we've already done so. So we've pulled all those levers. We've seen that the market is moving, that outsourcing as a means to an end continues, but an outsourcing as an end unto itself is diminishing. And it's all because of why we need to leverage those capabilities. And I think there's some other little interesting data points inside of this slide. If we talk about aligning, on the left-hand side, aligning front and back office operations to improve the customer experience, are there C-suite initiatives to that? It's a very small respondent base that said, absolutely, yes, that's what we're focusing on. And yet that's the second most satisfied area that says that we're already there. So I think what they're seeing is, our end-to-end process evolution that we as an industry have been discussing for now the last, decade, has worked. We've gotten where we needed to go, and that's driving improvement. So, so we're seeing that, they don't need to focus on that as much anymore, and yet they're still looking for ways to drive costs. That's what's driving, I think, the significant shift in the conversations we're having about straight to digital and digital enablement and whatnot. It actually gets to another question that was asked: is outsourcing really now more about offshoring? And I think that's maybe true. You still need to maintain offshore footprints, and they can be internal or external, and still achieve those cost driving objectives. And outsourcing as a specific, engagement of third party for the delivery of services is shifting its objectives to try to achieve the infusion of these technology capabilities, gain access to some other stuff. So I think the long story short is the C-suite's looking for us to do things, take cost out of the system, and drive value. We are looking to achieve those things, but now need a completely new tool set, because the tool sets of old are now mainstream, and therefore the low-hanging fruit's been plucked.
Okay. All right. And we talk a lot about the central operating model and how that can encompass all the knowledge in the organization. I'd love some of your views around, people think, oh yes, automation should belong in a COE within GBS, or should that be separate? The same with analytics and data, that sort of thing. Do you feel that we're seeing like successful GBS companies do that, or is it becoming problematic to have those types of COEs sort of centralized within a GBS function?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one. One of the best things about the various tool sets that are really entering the mainstream now, RPA and low code and even orchestration tools and whatnot, they are collectively democratizing the capability to do this. And it gets to your point that you had earlier, Phil, that you spoke to a few slides back about whether IT is in the middle or not. We're getting a distributed access to these capabilities. So there are a lot of pieces of the business that are able to engage and are able to drive. So that would seem to argue that it could get far flung. But this data seems to indicate that that's not really the case. There is still a reason that there's such a huge investment in these tool sets in the back office. It's because GBS is leading the charge. That aggregation leads naturally to sort of a much larger pilot base to pilot these capabilities and then to move them into production. That drives skill. That skill drives the capability to push out into the business. So, if you look down this list, generally speaking, we're seeing that GBS is very much at the front of these conversations and these capabilities, and we're seeing in the real world that the COEs are significant enablers to sort of evangelize capabilities that were first evolved back in the GBS land. But way down at the bottom of this chart, you see that that's great and all, but GBS can't do it alone. A COE does not mean an exclusive center of excellence. It's a leader, not a sole practitioner. If it were to cross over that line and become the only place, essentially a police force that says it's the only place where these activities can evolve, then it might fall into the same trap that I think is hampering IT's involvement in the same. They should shape and enable, and they are doing that. I think doing it well. They should not control and limit. I think these capabilities are still too young to try to put that genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, Phil, this is Saurabh. I think if I may add to what Charles was saying, I think what we are starting to see is also that GBS is becoming beyond just talking about GBS from a centralization of people perspective to GBS becoming the centralization of data and knowledge for the organization. Because I think, as we saw on some of the previous charts, the C-suite is still not satisfied with what GBS is delivering. And I think we've pulled all the levers on arbitrage and on offshoring, etc. So I think the next level of value creation that GBSs are starting to search for is not just through people centralization, but through data and knowledge centralization and creating value out of that. And in today's world, you have a number of these emerging technologies, from robotic process automation to different elements of AI to a number of advanced analytics that at least promises to help them drive that. And I think that's very visible in this chart as well.
Excellent. So let's get to the really fun stuff and look at shifting of investment priorities. So when we ran the study last year, RPA, as we mentioned earlier, was driving the focus very much in organizations, even bigger than cloud, IoT, analytics. Running it again this year, we see AI really become much more prominent on the minds of operations leaders. It's now leading their focus and their investment ideas. It's even stronger than RPA. Does that mean there's a change in mindset? Is there a change in activity? Is it that RPA has become fairly mainstream in that we understand what it is and we've seen it as part of a bigger picture? What do we think is truly going on here? Charles, I'd love your viewpoints on this.
Sure, I'll make a couple of comments and then I might actually pass to Anshul as well. I think the priority is certainly interesting. I'm actually more intrigued by the groupings of the things. RPA in 19 was way up at the top, and artificial intelligence was significantly further down the stack from an investment and from an interest perspective. And I think that was in part because AI was considered to be, and I think still is, obviously very much evolving, and was considered to be essentially discrete. That's the change I think that's happening here. I don't think that these items are discrete anymore, and people are realizing that. RPA as a tool unto itself is not a standalone entity. RPA is now grouping with artificial intelligence and other enabling technologies. I mentioned low code earlier and other things along those lines. What we're seeing is that there's a need for them to turn and evolve into solutions. And I think it's the solutions that are really going to add and drive value throughout the organization, both in the back office, but also into the middle and into the front. Anshul, do you want to maybe comment a little further and some of the thinking that you've put into this topic?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, the way I'm kind of talking to my clients about this, because technology is everybody's fascinated by it, and especially having been through that RPA journey in the last 5 years, everybody's kind of interested, but then there's levels of frustration in the last few years that have crept in as well. And what I am kind of telling my clients is two things. One is technology is going to continue to get commoditized. I'm actually going to go out on a limb and say that if we were to do this call 3 years from now, this list that we were looking at on the previous page would look different. So I'm asking them to really not be so focused on the technology, but really kind of be focused on, again, I'm gonna use the term capability, is invest in these platform capabilities that you can use to drive change in the business, from customer experience, employee experience, no touch, etc. And there are kind of most of my conversations are kind of focusing on 3 or 4 areas in particular. One is a data and automation platform, with cognitive being the key, kind of AI being the key, with RPA filling the white spaces. Because again, I think one of the challenges with RPA has been it is automating piecemeal tasks, but it needs to be part of an integrated strategy, not the standalone automation engine that a lot of people started to use it for. It does not provide the long-term answers, and you kind of need to be thinking about a data and automation platform strategy that integrates RPA with a lot of other things, from AI, analytics, and so on. The second one I'm talking to them increasingly about in this space is a cloud platform. So a pre-configured cloud solution embedded with kind of years of leading practice, enhanced with automation, We were talking about this yesterday. Think of how time and expense is done today versus how it was done 5 years ago, and we're going to continue to see those types of solutions, take hold. The third way I'm asking them to think about this is in terms of a service management platform. Customers and employees expect interactions with the enterprise to have a personal consumer-like feel. To meet this need, the organizations need to go beyond efficient, effective, process-based experiences. They need to have a service management platform that kind of starts to connect things like HR and IT and finance and other areas to deliver a unified experience to the employee or experience to the customer that is tailored to their needs. And kind of the fourth way I'm asking them to think about this is continue to experiment with emerging areas. So I see those first three as almost mainstream at this point, but things like blockchain, not quite a platform yet, but if as a business service leader, if you're not experimenting with it, if you're not exploring it, if you don't understand it, it's going to come in and kind of hit you really fast, and you would be reacting at that point.
Okay, interesting. And then we talk a lot about technology convergence. I think the fact that low code is changing a lot of the conversations and the way that people are looking at this. But how do you truly see this evolving, particularly from an operations standpoint? Do you see these coming together more, or do you see more of an individual strategy for each different technology with many of your clients, Anshul?
Yeah, I think Phil, a lot of them have still kind of continued to approach this as standalone technologies, but I think this is really going to start to take effect when they start to think of this integrated. But again, that's harder for many of these companies to do, But when you start to kind of put the layer on top of that of the customer journey or the employee journey, like I said, this could be your employee onboarding journey. This could be your customer delivery journey. When you start to think of this in terms of kind of layer on top the customer or the employee journey, a lot of the things that are on this page really start to then come together in helping manifest that journey, helping make that journey real. And that's the role that these technologies are going to play. I think if they continue to think of them as standalone technology initiatives, they're going to be suboptimal.
Interesting. And maybe, Charles, you've been sharing with us this emergence of more plug and play service delivery. How do you see this shifting? You talk about AI as a service and these elements.
Right. And I think this gets to that convergence that Anshul was just speaking to. The evolution that unfolds is the more these discrete technologies turn into packaged solutions, be they by outsourcing providers who are folding them into their core service offerings and in certain instances cannibalizing their own efforts, or into standalone, killer apps that fundamentally shift entire things like time and expense management, as Anshul just mentioned. That evolution is going to make the uptake explode. And so the more that these things are offered as a service or as integrated units that solve a particular business problem and are easily deployed versus needing to be, dabbled with by internal centers of excellence or elsewhere in the democratized world, I think the uptake will go, just that much more rapidly. And so we'll see, each one of these concepts, bots on demand or microservices that, like reaching out to a contact center linking into a voice recognition engine that can then send back information, and enable customer service support, or fully managed services where they sort of loop all of these in. In each case, what that will do is make it easier for enterprises to attack these capabilities without being attacked by the effort of wiring together all the sub technologies that make them up.
Okay, I think that there's a related question I've had from one of the audience around, is the reason the C-suite's dissatisfied about its ability to drive down cost, is that to do with the fact that it's just getting really difficult to show the total cost of service delivery? Is that one of the issues you think that's plaguing clients right now? Anshul, maybe you want to have a think about that one?
Yeah, I think it is getting harder. I think you made the comment earlier about there is less wiggle room. I think and Saurabh said the same thing, is the levers that were available to the business to continue to drive costs down. I think they've optimized those in many ways. What's next is really around the move to digital. But many of these many companies are not quite ready there. They don't have the capability set to take advantage of that to kind of drive the next 10% of the cost down, or the next 20% of the cost down. So I think that's where we will see some shift, is as they continue to build some of these capabilities that we have talked about today. We'll see that next wave of cost takeout begin to take effect.
Interesting. And another question, a lot of questions today. Another question which is around, to get to this one office state, companies need to make huge investments in systems, tools, and culture. So what percentage of companies within this research that we've been doing, in general, I think it's more of a general question, can get to like a one office state? Is this one in 1, 3, 5 years? We found there's a sense of maybe overconfidence from enterprises, and maybe there's a back office strategy that companies clearly know what they're doing, but are they truly linking it with a front office play? I mean, Charles, as you get your head around this sort of front to back viewpoint of the enterprise, what percentage of enterprises are really getting that and doing something and will get there?
Well, getting there and will get there are, of course, two different things. There was an earlier slide that you showed when you were talking about the dichotomy between the overall C-suite and the IT C-suite. And IT said it was a problem of talent, and the overall C-suite said it was a problem of legacy technology. I think that's actually really quite telling. It also correlates to the C-suite's dissatisfaction with cost reduction. Of course, R&D is an investment element, and innovation comes on the back of that investment. So I think it is not going to be an instantaneous single, leap forward. It is going to be an evolution, as has been this broader evolution of these service delivery models over time. As we kind of get there, if you think about it, we really will need to invest to transform technology to get to these enabling capabilities. The good news is they're becoming easier and generally less expensive to deploy than mega systems like ERPs of the past that were that offer, by the way, similar promises. So I think fundamentally speaking, it's going to take us time, and as we pull those levers, it's going to be difficult to do them in single fell swoops. It's going to be an evolution until great big chunks start to get plugged in those as a service elements, as I was talking about earlier. So it'll be small, large, small, large. That kind of evolution, and we'll look back on a webcast like this 10 years out and say, now that we've gotten digital one office in place, what's next?
So that's very prophetic, Charles. But if I may just add in one data point, Phil, we recently asked that same question to I think 200 odd different enterprises. And I think the answer was very telling. Practically everyone said that we want to get to the one office, but practically no one said that we are there yet. Right? And that's where we are. I think one office as a concept sort of does resonate with everyone, and people are trying to get there. But I think we are not there yet as an industry. And I think there are, I think, Charles, you were talking about it. I think the why people understand a little bit, it is not just cost reduction, it is about customer experience, it's about personalization, it's about digital disruption. I think the what is also fairly clear. It's something to do with all these emerging technologies. I think the how is not yet clear. How do you get to that promised land? is still sort of evolving.
Okay.
I'd add one more comment, Phil, if I may, and that is that, Saurabh made the comment that we're not there as an industry, and that's certainly true. The progress forward will absolutely vary by industry. So if you think about, retail and consumer, where so much of the work is hyper personalized, and so much of the transaction is digitized already, and there's a huge prevalence of straight through processing of order to cash as to use the GBS nomenclature. That premise, they're way in front, and they will continue, I think, to accelerate down that curve. If you think about some of the other industries, industrial manufacturing as an example, maybe less so, because their interface with the customer is in certain instances significantly removed, from that straight through processing capability. So I think we're going to see a divergence of those truly digitally enabled industries blazing a trail, and then the less digitally enabled industries will, I think, significantly benefit from that progress. And so the killer apps are likely to come from those domains first, I would think.
Excellent. And I'd like to finish up with a conversation around a couple of questions on this. One from a guy who's running one of these AI firms, but I noticed we've added low-code platforms to the AAA, it's intriguing for me, because I do feel the lower code we get, the more we're seeing the sort of the entry of the business executive into these environments. This could be a big game changer if we can get this right. Many of us saw, as an example, the Automation Anywhere announcement a week ago, which was very focused on building a UI that business users could use, and I'm just bringing them out as an example. We see this from Blue Prism and UiPath a bit as well, and some of these areas. And we're starting to see the emergence of, machine learning, but in a business context. How important is low code as maybe the vehicle that can get us over the hump with a lot of these emerging technologies? Do you see this as becoming increasingly prevalent? Anshul, do you want to start with that, and maybe Saurabh as well, because you've designed some of these models?
Yeah, my view is yes. I mean, short answer, yes. I think somebody mentioned earlier the comment around the democratization of these technologies. I think that's the way to do it. That's how this is going to be different from the ERP deployments of the past. So yes, I certainly see that continuing to happen, and the technology companies and the business continuing to push in that direction.
Yeah, and I agree. I think we came up with a very simple framework called the AAA trifecta, which was essentially saying that automation, artificial intelligence, and analytics are going to intersect each other. And once you start to look at the overlapping capabilities across those three technologies, that's when you can truly solve business problems. But I think over the next couple of years, you'll see a lot more circles being added to that AAA trifecta. I think there's going to be, as this slide says, there's going to be a technology convergence. And I think more and more people will realize the power of and versus the power of or. It's no longer automation versus AI versus something else. I think a lot of these technologies are going to converge. Even if you look at blockchain, there's a huge convergence of blockchain with IoT and AI. Right, and once you start to combine these technologies, that's when you get real business solutions. I think otherwise we are always looking for the cart in front of the horse.
Okay, good stuff. Okay, well, we're getting near the end, so we went over a little bit. Apologies for our PowerPoint problems we had earlier, first world problems, I'd like to say, but I think we still had the same problems with Windows 95 back in the day. I'd love to just get maybe around the room summary from the guys on the line. I mean, Charles, you've been at this a long time, and are we actually truly entering a transitional phase in the industry? Is something markedly different today than it was 5 years ago, in your experience, in terms of where we're going to go in the next couple of years?
I think we are. I think the heads of business services need to really think about what is their value proposition into the marketplace now that they've now that they've pulled the ginormous levers of outsourcing and offshoring and process standardization, they need to think about what's next. That's what they're being asked for, and if they want to continue to hold their position of prominence in organizations, they need to they need to turn and start to capitalize on some of the broader value that they can bring to bear, while still helping to contain cost and improve the organization's profile. So I think that there is an industry-wide clamoring for for what's next, and I think the heads of business services are going to be leading that charge to transform us.
Okay, Anshul, how fast are we going to get there? Is this another 10-year journey, 15-year journey, or is this going to move more swiftly as people are getting smarter? There's more information flying around on social media. We're more aware of what's going on.
Absolutely. I mean, I would be hugely disappointed if this is another 10, 15-year journey. I think the technologies alone are going to kind of pull us to react a lot faster. And I think, again, from a business services perspective, if you're still thinking about your organizational construct of business services, you're kind of thinking in the past, and it will take you 15 years to get there. But if you start to think about this as a capability construct, and therefore what capabilities can you start bringing online, those capabilities are going to allow you to do this faster and adapt faster. And I think that too was something that Saurabh said earlier, that starts to become the how you make it happen. So yeah, definitely it has to be significantly faster, and those capabilities will allow you to do that.
Thank you. And Saurabh, I think a final word from you here. You've looked a lot at blockchain as an example of emerging tech that hasn't quite hit mainstream yet, but is feverishly being evaluated. Do you see elements of that changing the game here, or is that a different conversation?
No, it is. I think a continuum, right? So if you look at, we've been talking a lot about moving the GBS, moving from back office to the one office. And if you look at one office, that talks about customer experience, but there is no one office that can guarantee you customer experience, right? There's no one entity that can own a customer. So if I'm buying a car, no matter how great my car manufacturer is, my customer experience is going to be driven not just by them, but by the insurance, by a whole host of players that I'll have to interact with. And so very quickly we realize that even the one office is not the optimal state, right? You have to get beyond the one office. And that's where ecosystems or the hyper-connected enterprise that we've been talking about, Phil, starts to come in, because if customer experience is the ultimate goal that we're trying to go for, then one organization, it's going to be very hard to sort of own the customer. And so people will have to play in ecosystems. And then blockchain is the technology that allows inter-organizational connections, right? And that's where we are starting to see blockchain become real. It's obviously not prevalent. It's still very, very early days. But we are starting to see blockchain become prevalent. Just last week, FDA sort of rolled out a pilot on pharma companies doing sort of supply chain track and trace for their medicines. We've seen retail look at supply chain. We've seen a lot of interesting stuff around trade finance. In Europe, there's 20 banks who are working on trade finance on blockchain. So I think as we see ecosystems, as people start to realize that we all have to come together, and ecosystem starts to become more important, and blockchain will definitely be the technology there. But I agree, it's early days. It's still very, very early days.
Early days indeed. Okay, I mean, yeah, just from my own perspective, I think a lot about 2008 and how that changed the game with operations and outlooks. I think there was a genuine burning platform that we all had to do things differently, or we were all out of business. I worry that burning platform is not quite past smoldering phase at this point, because we know what's out there. We know where this is going to eventually go. We know what the capabilities are, but there doesn't feel like there's a burning like economic driver to shift. And I think when we start to see that, and I think we will, it may be maybe some gradual tightening of global markets. It could be, God forbid, a crash that could come. That will actually force mindsets to move more aggressively, because I think we've set up a lot of the capability. It's just sometimes we need something to really drive us there, and that might be the state we're in. Maybe we're in the calm before the storm. So, well, wonderful. I've really enjoyed this mature conversation with some great people, and we're going to do, I think, a few more of these over the course of the next few months. So hopefully, everyone can keep coming back. HFSresearch.com. You can download the conversation. You can get a copy of the slides. We're also doing some roundtables from HFS, both in the US and the UK, where some can come and join us for some of these discussions live as well. So check out our website and that sort of thing. And KPMG doing some really cool stuff with a lot of these emerging technologies, particularly, it's not just around the outsourcing model now, but some great work around AI and blockchain I've been hearing about from many of the folks as well. So thank you guys. It's great working with you, and we're going to do some more studies with you next year, I hope. So I very much enjoy that collaboration and sharing more of the research that we've produced. So thank you very much, Charles, Anshul, Saurabh. We'll get together very soon. Thank you.